Teachers aren't generally drawn to the profession by the promise of great money, fame, and power. I mean, those people might exist, but they get real disappointed real quickly. Every teacher I have ever met got into teaching because they care about students. Your teachers all want you to feel successful and cared for, but they also have to concern themselves with things like covering massive amounts of content and meeting state standards and preparing you for high-stakes tests and exams. So with the very best of intentions, we gather all the information we can about your academic lives. We track your grades and your participation in class. We give you formative and summative assessments. We use that data to inform our instruction. We create early warning indicator spreadsheets that track how many classes you're failing, how many absences you have, how many demerits, how many dean sends, etc. And I'm not saying that these things aren't good practices or that they have no place in schools. I'm just trying to tell you that I once sat in a meeting to decide if a shy, struggling student needed special education services, and about a week later, that student showed up to school wearing sandbags strapped around his wrist. And he had them hidden under a long-sleeve t-shirt. And he walked over to another student and he started beating the crap out of him because he knew that the sandbags would make him hit harder. And it turns out that that kid had been viciously bullying him every day after school for months, and none of us knew. Because too often, school emphasizes the academic over the personal. In my early years of teaching, I was at a public high school in Boston that required me to teach 12 novels and 10 literary analysis essays a year. Like, setting aside the time to really get to know my students did not feel like an option. So I started doing journal entries with prompts that were connected to the content because there was time for that. And I found myself building relationships with students on the page. And as they became more comfortable sharing those entries out loud, they started building relationships with each other as well. And then in my third year of teaching, I taught a creative writing class where students were crafting personal narratives, and I saw the process turbocharged. Like, students were working harder than I'd ever seen them work. They were producing better written products than I'd ever seen. And my relationships with them were deepening in ways I'd never experienced. It's like I was making deposits into some kind of interpersonal connection bank and then writing and cashing checks to get students to achieve what I knew they were capable of academically or behaviorally. I was banking on relationships. The more I got to know my students, the harder they worked for me, the better they behaved. And what I've come to understand is that relationships are the currency of instruction. And students work harder for the teachers they love. And you can't love someone you don't know. And I can already hear the teachers in the room. They're like, "Lady, what are you asking me to do?" Like, there is so much to cover, and my kids come in behind. And a school board member once said to me, "Relationships don't close opportunity gaps." But I believe so strongly that they can. And I also believe that if you as students start perceiving your teacher as promoting things like test performance goals over things like interaction and mutual respect, then that can cause damaging withdrawals from that interpersonal connection bank. And if that account gets overdrawn, your motivation and engagement will decline, which will negatively affect their instruction and your learning. Because after all, if there's no personal connection to school, or worse, no motivation to even go to school, then what good will dozens of essay assignments do? And listen, it's very important. Academics are very important. I'm not trying to say that they're not. Of course they are important. I'm not asking your teachers to sacrifice the academic for the personal. I'm asking them to strengthen the academic with the personal. I'm asking us to value both. So how do you do that? How do teachers build the kinds of relationships with and between you guys that will allow you to feel authentically engaged and academically successful? They must allow you to bear witness to each other's lives. And they can start doing that in small ways like journal entries or personal narrative writing. But students don't tend to share their writing in very public ways, right? In my classroom, publication celebrations were students silently moving around the room, reading and commenting on each other's work, and it was beautiful. But it didn't really feel like bearing witness. And then in 2008, I fell in love with The Moth. It's a storytelling nonprofit with a very simple premise. It's just people telling true stories on stage, no notes, just them and the mic. And I will never forget the first time I put my name in at a Moth Story Slam. I told the story about the end of a major relationship. And at the end, the host came over and gave me a giant hug and a swig of his whiskey. And at intermission, like, so many people came up to me to tell me they'd been through something similar, or just to say that I'd be okay. And I remember so vividly the train ride home that night, thinking, like, this, right? Like, this could be a way for my students and I to bear witness to each other's lives. Like, what if I explicitly taught my students how to choose and craft stories from their lives and then allowed them to publicly perform those stories? So I hunted the people at the Moth Central office down, and I charmed them into letting me work for them. And I started doing these storytelling workshops all across New York City. And I eventually devoted my entire dissertation to exploring how storytelling can help students navigate their identities and strengthen their connections to each other and to us and to school. And I saw storytelling increase student motivation, and I saw it decrease behavioral issues, and I saw it build connections between kids who'd never really interacted before. And I saw it help students make sense of the major events and relationships in their lives. And this one time, a 16-year-old basically wrote my entire dissertation for me. When she said, you know, miss, the painful things that happen in our lives are the ones we have the most emotions about. And those emotions tend to get jumbled and confused and twisted because we have a lot of them and they don't know what to do with each other. So they're like vines. And they tangle in each other and they just freeze. And when you take that painful thing and you tell a story about it, it's like taking those vines and untangling them and laying them out so that not only does it make sense to everyone else, but in the process, it makes more sense to you. I was like, I am never going to be able to come up with something better than that. And I didn't, for the record. And another time, the teacher whose classroom I was working in, she said, you know, I just find storytelling helps with everything in class. Like, I don't really have disciplinary issues for the most part. Like, once students start showing themselves to each other, once that trust is built, I don't really have disciplinary issues. And if I do, they're minor, right? It's not the major stuff that happens in other classes. And this is the point in my talk when I need to be very, very clear with you that storytelling is not a magic wand. The power of public personal storytelling is, like most powerful things, double-edged. It is not to be used lightly. Your teachers shouldn't do this work without being prepared, and I would argue without being trained, to listen for trauma, to help you untangle those vines, to help you decide if going public with a story is safe, and to help you understand that we should be telling stories from our scars and not our wounds, which is a popular saying in the storytelling scene. But I have seen that granting students the time and the space to bear witness to their lives can increase student motivation and classroom community in such powerful ways, and connected, motivated kids with access to strong curriculum and instruction are academically successful. That is how relationships can close opportunity gaps. I train teachers now, and I tell my teacher candidates all the time, when you run into your former students on the street or on the subway or at Target, and you will, they will never remember the grade that you gave them. And they probably won't remember half the content that you taught them. But as Maya Angelou would say, they will absolutely remember what it felt like to be in your class. We as teachers, we can't separate who we are from what happens in our classrooms, and neither can you guys. So our classrooms must be spaces where we can all bring our most authentic selves. It is our responsibility as educators to bear witness to your life and to create space for you to bear witness to each other's lives. Ask your teachers to make room for the personal, and they'll see gains in the academic. Thank you.